BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Mondays, I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Firstly, I would like to give a big thank you to everyone who listened to my interview that I did with Jude Morrow on Friday about the D.B. Cooper case. Jude Morrow is the author of the book Dan Cooper, and part 2 of that interview will be coming out on Friday. And to all of you who follow the Jean Bonnet episodes here on Black Box Online Radio, last week's episode will be coming out this Tuesday instead of the weekend spot. It will be coming out on Tuesday, so lots of true crime discussions here on BBOR looking at unsolved mysteries and criminal psychology. The first Zodiac crime occurred on December 20th of 1968 with the Lake Herman Road murders. The second was on July 4th of 1969 with the Blue Rock Springs shooting. Then there was the Lake Berryessa stabbing on September 27th, and the murder of Paul Stein, the taxi driver, on October 11th. Not only was the Zodiac killer a serial killer, he also wrote letters, designed cryptograms, mailed in greeting cards and diagrams, and of course made multiple threats. The first thing that I have for you guys here on the Zodiac Killer News Report is actually something that I found in a Facebook group called Weird, Fantastic, Beautiful, and Odd. And this is simply a group that is designed only for sharing different types of photos, and I thought that it was in one of the Zodiac Killer Facebook groups, but this was something that was just shared because people were appreciating the design. And it says, in 2016, archaeologists have unearthed a 3rd century BC mosaic featuring a reclining skeleton holding a drink with the inscription in Greek, "Be cheerful, enjoy life." I think that there are some undeniable similarities between this and the Zodiac Killer's Halloween card. One of the cards mailed in by the Zodiac Killer was the Halloween card, mailed on October 27th of 1969, and it was sent to the reporter Paul Avery, with his name misspelled Averly. And even though this isn't a perfect match, I just noticed several different similarities, particularly the way that the skeleton is crossing his legs. And we've talked for a long time about how the Zodiac Killer may have been inspired by clues from ancient Greece, and also just the Greeks in general, being an avid reader of these types of subjects. And if you want to hear more about this, you can find that in the book The Zodiac Killer: Murderers and Histories, Ciphers and Crimes by C.G. Karras, and I have a direct book discussion about that here on BBOR. But what do you think about this? Do you think the skeleton looks similar to the Zodiac's Halloween card? I mean, the legs are very similar, but the major difference, I think, is that the skeleton is holding a drink and has one hand above his head, whereas on the Halloween card, the skeleton that was positioned by the Zodiac Killer, the posable novelty skeleton, is hanging from the spider web with open arms. And then there is the what appears to be some type of leaf or a seat that the skeleton is on, and the one from the Halloween card does not have a seat of any kind, because once again the skeleton is hanging in the air. Now, I think it would be almost impossible for the Zodiac Killer to have actually looked at this image and used it as a direct inspiration, but I just wanted to point out that these types of skeleton designs could exist in other Greek history books, they could exist in other textbooks, and it wouldn't be that shocking. This exact one was unearthed in 2016, so of course that's not the one that the Zodiac Killer was looking at, but maybe something similar put some ideas in the Zodiac Killer's mind and imagination. And right now I would like to respond to one of the bigger pieces of Zodiac news out there, and that is the comments that you guys left on the episode for the suspect, John Charles Treffel. Last week I did Zodiac Monday, as I normally do, and then there was a big piece of Zodiac Killer news that came out just about an hour after I had uploaded the show. I began to notice that all of these posts on Facebook started appearing where everybody was talking about a new Zodiac Killer suspect named John Charles Treffel, and I would like to look at what you guys had to say. because I think that this could be an interesting exercise. John Charles Trefil is being accused of being the Zodiac killer of the 1960s by his daughter, Galena Trefil. However, she is mostly just accusing him of being a serial killer, as well as making comments about how he could be responsible with other types of crimes, particularly conspiracy to commit murder, because she points out that he may have been in association with other serial killers and they were operating a type of network. But even though the Zodiac angle isn't the driving force behind her claims, she has definitely spread some of the fires because there are threads devoted to John Charles Trefil as Zodiac killer suspect. There are, of course, posts on Reddit, and then there are also people who have already endorsed this theory and they're saying that he is their suspect. And I read all the stuff off on a bonus episode that I did about John Charles Trefil. To provide some background information about him, if you did not hear the bonus episode which came out last week, he was a medical doctor specializing in psychiatry. He would have been 29 years old at the time of Zodiac activity, and his birthday was after the murder of Paul Stine, so he would have been 29 during the entirety of the Zodiac crimes, and he is on his deathbed now. He is actually 86 years old at the time of this recording, and Galena Trefil has told several different stories. In her first account, she said that the reason why she's going public with all of this is because on his deathbed, he encouraged her to do so. He confessed to her that he was a serial killer, saying something to the effect of, "I'm about to die, I want to come clean, I want to share the truth, please put it out there." But she's also said that if he is ever arrested, he will fake being crazy, and she also told the authorities that she has recorded his confessions, and she has the audio recordings, but then she will also go back with a wire if they want him to confess again. Now, Galena has also shared a handwriting sample of Dr. John Charles Trefil's writing, and there are several similarities and several differences, but the comment that came in first is from Liz SN1, who says, "The letter K appears similar in both. Before the internet, how on earth would three serial killers get together?" Oh, by the way, I did notice that. I did think that the Zodiac had a rather similar letter K compared to John Charles Trefil. I'll give Galena that point, as well as one to Liz here. But how would three people get together before the internet? Just two words for you: human interaction. And this is not something that is completely impossible because there are people who incorporate other individuals into their crimes. And I know what Liz is trying to say. She's trying to say, how could somebody just get involved with a type of network of killers prior to electronic communication? It would simply be about knowing the people that are also experiencing homicidal tendencies. And it's not completely impossible because people do get recruited into these operations. For example, like let's look at Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. They met because of correspondences via snail mail and so on. They were the Boneyard Killers, absolutely vicious and torturous murderers, and they even had a female accomplice named Cricket. And perhaps a lesser-known example would be Robert Leroy Anderson, the duct tape killer from the Midwest, and he was not a prolific serial killer, but he did incorporate two accomplices into his criminal operations, so that could definitely happen, and I don't think that it would require any strategic amount of electronic communication or any significant form of electronic communication. This could be done by snail mail because they're not even reading. They're like the government isn't reading your mail all the time. People can sneak all types of things through the mail, such as, let's say, the Zodiac letters, the Zodiac ciphers, and the greeting cards. All of that stuff was not examined upon arrival. So then I would like to go to the next comment from the Mad Dabbler, who says something about John Charles Trefil as a Zodiac killer suspect. "We don't know if this old dude is mentally exploitable, perhaps even suffering from undiagnosed dementia, and willing to read scripts on video. It would explain her for seeing him acting crazy. She wouldn't be the first child to exploit their parent for money or fame. I really hope she would not do that. I really hope Galena Trefil would not do something like that, exploiting her own father, accusing him of being a serial killer simply because she has the opportunity or that he is going to be saying anything. It does seem like he is in very poor health, and I was really quite surprised when I found out that she was getting these confessions from him and he is still alive even though he is bedridden, but that is the situation that we are dealing with. The next comment comes to us from Michelle Schiesel, who says, also at this time, unless it's being hidden, they have not done anything more than look at the ground. No dogs, no digging, no ground-penetrating radar at any of the alleged sites. I don't believe all the DNA has even been entered. There are several articles on this. And she's talking about the claims that were made by Galina Treffel. And one of them is that, I mean, she actually has contacted the authorities in the past. She's contacted the authorities multiple times. And apparently, in one of the cases, there was not a DNA match between John Charles Treffel and the victim, who is still unidentified. Now, let's be clear, that was not a Zodiac victim. But when I first read this comment from Michelle, I don't believe all the DNA has been entered. Several Googled articles on this. With the Zodiac killer of the 1960s, I also don't believe that all the DNA has been entered. I also don't believe that everything that we know about the Zodiac killer's DNA has been made available to the general public. I believe that perhaps they're going to be able to extract DNA from news sources. I believe that they're going to be able to extract DNA from things that the Zodiac killer may have touched, particularly the letters and the paper that was on the letters. There could be some form of touch DNA if they were well preserved, but I do think that they should have access to certain elements of and items that could contain the Zodiac killer's DNA. And we have one here from Libby Morgan. And Libby Morgan was the one who actually told me that his name is pronounced Treffel, not Treefil, the way that I was saying in the bonus episode. So thank you, Libby, for that. And Libby says, this man was my psychiatrist for 5 years in Fort Bragg, California. I know Galina. I believe her. All right, well, here's a very important issue, though. I mean, do I believe Galina Treffel? Yes, I do. I do believe that she's actually having these conversations with her father. I believe that she is telling the truth to a certain extent. Now, she has changed her story multiple times, but do I believe that she is honest with her intentions? Yes, I do. However, that should not have any bearing at all on whether or not this person's suspect or person of interest was the Zodiac killer. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I normally do the segment True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, where I go live and I talk to you guys about any true crime subject under the sun or in the darkness. And I often start those episodes with the Crime Talk points. And one of the points that I heard from the show Crime Talk was, sometimes when people don't follow the evidence, they have a break from reality. They start defending a claim, and they are not looking at the realistic challenges to that claim. And this is just what will happen if you're simply going to say that you believe someone and you will not back down from it. And I'm not saying that Libby is actually doing that. She just left one comment here on Black Box Online Radio. But for somebody like me, maybe you guys in the audience, we always have to remember that just because somebody is being genuine with their intentions does not mean at all that, number one, their person of interest is actually the Zodiac killer, and number two, that there's going to be any real value to their claims. I mean, this is about following the evidence, and where is the evidence going to point us? Because I can give you countless Zodiac researchers and sleuths that have made observations about the case that are perhaps all coming from a good place. They genuinely believe what they're saying. They genuinely believe that they've had certain experiences. It doesn't mean that they are all the Zodiac killer. But thank you for that, Libby. Our next one comes to us from Frozen Rope, who says, interesting stuff. Haven't heard of this guy before now. Her statement about being willing to wear a wire might just be something out of desperation she feels the need to do to convince the authority. Perhaps the audio recording she has may not be proof enough in her mind, or perhaps when he's told something to the authorities. Conversely, if the authorities knew she was meeting with him in person, it would be much harder to refute, or so she feels. But, even though I think that Galina is telling the truth, I am going to get to one of the major points, and that's why I think that she's telling the truth with a lot of her claims. She did contact Mendocino County, and she had them look at one of the claims that her father was allegedly making to her. She said that her father was responsible for a murder in the early 1970s in Mendocino County, and a big thing that she has been inconsistent with is she's stating on social media that the authorities aren't listening to her, when the authorities then issued a press release stating that Yes, we did listen to her. Yes, we did follow through with these leads. Yes, we did do a DNA comparison between her father and a victim that she claimed her father murdered, and the DNA did not match. And the first person that I saw share that was actually David Oranchak. So if that means that these stories, I repeat, stories are not holding up with this unidentified person from the 1970s, how on earth are they going to hold up with the Zodiac crimes? Once again, it's not the heart and soul of Galina's investigation. She just wants the authorities to look at her father as a serial killer. The Zodiac killer and the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer get lumped into that discussion. But overall, I mean, I think that if she were a scammer, she wouldn't actually go through with the DNA test because she should know that it's not going to match. However, she did go through with that and it still didn't match. That to me tells us that she is at least telling the truth to a certain extent, and maybe she's changing her story because she wants people to believe it, or perhaps she's also in denial of the evidence. And that's what I said. That's what I said about the break from reality. When you are faced with contradictory evidence, don't just reshape the theory to kind of keep the suspect profile alive. Accept that this person's DNA did not match. Maybe there's something else going on here that we don't completely know about. And I do admit though that one of the strongest pieces of evidence in her claim is that her father, John Charles Trefill, kept a journal. And on one page, he wrote a very, very detailed murder threat where it doesn't sound like he's joking. It sounds like he actually is contemplating murder. And James Lucenti says, sounds kind of fishy, but worth investigating. Well, absolutely, it's worth investigating because when we are faced with these new suspects and persons of interest, I mean, are we just going to say, no, I'm not going to listen to you because, well, it's different? I think that that should only be done with if there is a very, very good reason. Again, like if somebody is using incoherent, mangled language, I normally don't entertain their suspect profile. If somebody is proposing somebody that was not in the country on the dates of Zodiac activity, I perhaps would not entertain their suspect profile. But she even claimed that she had confessions about these crimes. Yes, of course I'm going to investigate and follow up on it. Leslie Lopez writes, the confessions would be inadmissible in court and he would not cooperate with law enforcement, hence why having a wire would be warranted. I mean, fair enough if you think that that's a reason. I mean, if anything, though, like, I'm not really doubting Kalina. I think that there are certain parts of her story that do match up. AIC 5073 says, I think people should have paid more attention back to this slaves in the afterlife. Where does that phrase come from? What religion speaks that way? Determining that may have singled him out for being a white man in the 1960s and practicing a religion that was not popular in America at the time. Well, to respond to AIC here, there are a couple places where that could have come from. It could have come from the book The Strange Ways of Man by E. Royston Pike. It could have come from a Filipino religion, which I'm not familiar with, even though I spend part of the year in the Philippines every year. I'm not familiar with the exact belief system, though those are the claims of Thomas Henry Horan, and it could have also come from the Egyptian pharaohs who believed that when they died they would be reborn and they would still hold on to their slaves. And some people have talked about some things like in Islam about how when you die you will get like the 72 virgins and so on, or even other things like about how Islam uses slaves in different ways, like slaves for soldiers, and I have not really found anything about when you die, you will be reborn with those whom you have killed in Islam. And I've also looked at this a little bit over the years, and I just don't necessarily see those types of things. But the first two examples, actually first three examples that I just listed off, the strange ways of man, the Filipino traditions, and the Egyptian mythological circles could easily be strong influences. So the next comment that we have comes to us from Jared Wignall, who says, I've not heard about John Charles Trefill before, so this is all new to me. The fact that there are recordings of him confessing to his apparent murders is definitely something you don't hear too often when a child is saying that their parent is the Zodiac or some other serial killer. Absolutely, Jared. Spot on. That's the whole reason why I made the bonus episode. The fact that the police already listened and analyzed the recordings sort of tells you what the authorities think the likelihood of Treffel actually being a killer in some of the people he apparently killed. Thanks for talking about this, Ned. I hope you're doing well. Have a great day and keep up the great work. Jared, that was amazing. No, that shows that the authorities heard her out, they listened to her, they looked at the physical evidence, and it does not seem to be very strong in their opinions. Or let's even look at this in a more factual way, that the DNA didn't match. She provided an explanation about how he committed a murder. The DNA didn't match. But then what do we make of that journal entry about him wanting to kill somebody? That person's name was Mike, by the way. So Silver Stuff has a comment here. As per I've Got to Kill Mike, that quote, he talks about getting rid of the body. The Zodiac never got rid of bodies. He talks about how Mike was cheating him out of $2,000, and he's writing off the $2,000 as a loss. Like this is a revenge killing. The Zodiac never talked about revenge for a monetary debt. I think listening to the man speak would be very insightful. If we can be certain it's him talking, one detail that struck me as unlikely in the vast time frame the daughter gives us as his killing career. Didn't she say he started in the 1950s to the 1990s? That's like 45 years, but never drew attention to the police? Hard to accept without some big evidence. And, I mean, the second part of the comment really is spot on, that she's saying that Galena is saying that her father started killing in the 1950s. Then from 1965 to 1999, he murdered on average one person per month. That would be 12 people per year from 1965 to 1999. Silver Stuff, excellent point. This guy isn't someone like Edward Wayne Edwards who got caught and who was arrested. This guy isn't someone who actually dealt with the authorities, and by Galena's own admission, she wants to do this because he was never caught. So this is really just kind of a big question as to how did he get away with this for so long if he is murdering a dozen people a year for, let's see, how many years would that be? 34 years? I mean, countless individuals would have been murdered by him. So this is something that I think is worthy of skepticism. But Silver Stuff also says that he is threatening to kill someone named Mike and get rid of the body. The Zodiac didn't get rid of the bodies, and this was done for a financial reason, and the Zodiac killer did not talk about committing murders for financial gain. So those are also big strikes against him being the Zodiac killer. But what would you like to say about John Charles Treffel as the Zodiac killer suspect? I would like to turn things over to you guys, and I would like to know what you think about this new suspect or person of interest. But there is one final comment that came in, and this one is from SkidFan5, who says, "Hi Ned, there's been a lot of talk and investigation into the suspect, Joe Bevilacqua, in Italy. Could you elaborate a bit? After reviewing many suspects, I consider Bevilacqua a prime suspect. Thanks." Okay, SkidFan5, thank you so much for that. Joe Bevilacqua is a suspect that I've talked about before on the Zodiac Killer News Reports. I did an episode about him about a year and a half ago. And he is someone who has some very fascinating things with the timelines. And it's almost to the point where I don't even want to talk about the timelines anymore. I almost don't even want to talk about how this person's dates match up with the timelines of Zodiac activity. But with Joseph Bevilacqua, it really is different because he is accused of 2 sets of homicides. There is a theory out there that was put forward by Francesco Amiconi that the Zodiac killer of the 1960s in the United States of America was also a serial killer in Italy called the Monster of Florence. But the odd thing with the Monster of Florence is the first crime occurred in 1968, and then there's this enormous gap in the Monster of Florence's activities going all the way to 1974. The entirety of Zodiac activity is contained within 1968 and 1974. And the suspect in question, Joe Bevilacqua, moved from the United States of America to Italy in 1974. And all of this stuff is coming together. And, I mean, just on paper, that seems to work. But there is somebody out there named Massimo Bosco, who was running a website called debunkingjodiac.wordpress.com, not Zodiac, Jodiac, Joediac, debunking Zodiac, because these allegations from Francesco Amiconi actually started in 2017. That was something that I also only recently learned. And this blog, debunkingjodiac.wordpress.com, was started in 2018. And it is a bilingual blog. There are posts in both English and Italian, written by Massimo Bosco. And this is one, though, that I have to look at, because we're just going to get to the heart of the issue here on Zodiac Monday. Has been said that Joe Bevilacqua was a Vietnam veteran, and he served in the Cambodia campaign. At first, it was claimed that he was part of the 25th Infantry. The problem with that is that there were 3 letters that were sent by the Zodiac Killer between April and June of 1970. And when he was with the Cambodia campaign, if he was in the 25th Infantry, that took place between April 29th and July 22nd of 1970. He shouldn't have been in the San Francisco Bay Area. He should have been in Cambodia. Given the short duration of his military operation, it is unthinkable that he may have had the opportunity to return to California for 2 or 3 times for the sole purpose of posting the letters and then returning to the battlefield. Okay, and I actually looked at the list, and the Zodiac letter was mailed on the 28th of that month, as opposed to the 29th. Yes, April 28th was the dragon card that was mailed, and then the letter that was mailed on June 26th of 1970. I mean, I'm going to pull this up, but just going off of memory, yes, that was the one with the Z32 cipher. So I absolutely think that that was a genuine Zodiac communication, and at the time that those letters were mailed, he should have been either en route to Cambodia or in Cambodia. So those are some big strikes against Joe Bevilacqua. But this is something that would happen because it appears that Francesco Amiconi was looking into this, and by Bosco's own admission that all of the references to the 25th Infantry Division are no longer present after a certain time. Let's just read here. Later, the references to the 25th Infantry disappeared, and it was stated that Joe Bevilacqua was part of the 5th Infantry, not the 25th Infantry. But here, things become even more problematic, because the dates overlap with the timeline of both the Zodiac case and the Monster of Florence case. Because the 5th Infantry, I repeat, the 5th Infantry should have been active, and they should have been operating in July of 1968 during the Tet Offensive, and this is when the murders took place of Bianco and Loki. It's actually Lo Bianco. The Lo Bianco Loki murders are the ones that were committed by the Monster of Florence in 1968, and as I understand, they've actually done a ballistics report, and they've determined that one of the firearms that was used in a Monster of Florence shooting was the firearm that was used for the Lo Bianco Loki murders in 1968. But at the same time, that one was in September, and it states that during the 5th Infantry should have been going to Vietnam between 1968 and 1971, specifically July of 1968, and when they were not in Vietnam, they were stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado. So how on earth would he have been able to commit the Lo Bianco Loki murders if he was part of the 5th Infantry? So no matter which way we slice it, it appears that there are some major problems with Joe Bevilacqua as a Zodiac Killer suspect and a Monster of Florence suspect. And I would like to thank Massimo Bosco for his reporting. And I would like to look at a post now that was written on the biography webpage about the Zodiac Killer, because I thought that this one was rather interesting. This one here is going to be talking about the case today, solve ciphers and more theories. More than 50 years after amateur code breakers solved the Z408 cipher, the Z340 cipher was solved, and the message that was revealed was, "I hope you're having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all the sooner, because I now have enough slaves to work for me, where everyone else has nothing. When they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I am not afraid, because I know that my new life will be an easy one. in Paradise death. In October of 2021, a team of former law enforcement investigators called the Casebreakers claimed to have identified the Zodiac killer. They believed that Gary Francis Post, who died in 2018, was responsible for the murders. According to USA Today, this claim relied largely on DNA evidence that was found at the scene of Sherry Jo Bates's murder in 1966 at the Riverside City College in California. Additionally, the casebreakers claimed that Post had the same shoe size and similar forehead scars to the Zodiac killer, and that the letters contained anagrams of his name. However, police have remained adamant that Bates is not a confirmed victim and that Post wasn't made a suspect. Okay, so that came out. We heard that news. But as many of you will remember, there was a DNA test that was done, and Ken Maines of Unsolved No More claims to be behind this, and he states that the DNA of Gary Francis Post did not match the DNA on file to Sherry Jo Bates. And the real reason I'm talking to you guys about this one is because there was an article that was posted on the University of Maryland Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice, their website, and it says UMD forensic expert team might have identified the Zodiac killer. And I just wanted to point out that the University of Maryland has a senior lecturer who has joined in with the case breakers. And this is a little bit older, but I just wanted to share this one because it's something I haven't looked at before here on Black Box Online Radio. The case could remain cold if a police department doesn't consider evidence. University of Maryland senior lecturer Tom Muriello and a team of 40-plus FBI officials, law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and forensic scientists believe that they have finally identified the man responsible for the 1960s murders in California, the Zodiac killer. And I am almost just very disappointed, though, with the University of Maryland and this guy Tom Muriello, that he would just throw himself in with these case breakers almost too easily. Here's his quotation. "We are not suggesting we are going to analyze it ourselves," explained Muriello. "We are saying here is the DNA from our suspect. Let's see if we can establish a nexus between him and the victim, Sherry Jo Bates. It makes no difference to Muriello and the rest of the case breakers that the Zodiac murders occurred decades ago or that their suspect is now deceased. We have families who are still alive and have no closure," concluded Muriello. "That is what we are looking to do, bring closure to the families of all the victims." And, it really is surprising to me that the case breakers were able to get so many people involved with their theories and their observations and just put so many people under their banner when in reality they have one of the worst suspects that has ever been proposed, Gary Francis Post, who is most likely just going down a dead end. And as I already told you, the DNA did not match with the killer of Sherry Jo Bates, which was a core element of their entire claim. But furthermore, how can people just not see the flimsy narrative that has been promulgated by Tom Colbert of the case breakers? And that's not a strike against Dale Julin, who wrote the book Catching Zodiac about Gary Francis Post. That is about how Tom Colbert tried to network with all of these individuals and get people from very educated backgrounds to look at a suspect that was almost certainly not the Zodiac. But if you want to challenge me on any of those things, you can put your ideas in the comment section down below. I would love to know what you guys think about Gary Francis Post as a Zodiac killer suspect. And right now, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. Anybody can support this channel with buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first shout out comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. Batman66 has also shared a lot of resources that have been used for episodes of Black Box Online Radio lately. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery as well. Thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. Everything is greatly appreciated here on BBO War. And this is not a financial contribution, but I would like to give a big shout out to Dennis G., who has helped share a lot of images that are used in the Black Box Online Radio presentations, the images that you see going by on the screen. A lot of them have been created and or shared by Dennis G. So thank you so much to everybody who has helped Black Box Online Radio, and also feel free to check out some of the new content that is coming out here on BBO War. You guys know all about Cooper Friday talking about DB Cooper, Ripper Wednesday talking about Jack the Ripper, and I told you that tomorrow there will be the episode about Jean-Benet Ramsey, and I'm going to try and keep up with the live streams for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. So there's going to be a lot of discussions that we're going to be having here on BBO War, as well as responding to the true crime news. So please put anything you want in the comment section down below. I would love to know what you think about any of the stories that have been discussed, and you guys know about blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. The next thing that I would like to discuss with you guys here on Zodiac Monday is a documentary called The Horrifying Zodiac Killer, and this is one that was shared on the True Lives channel, and you might hear me referring to it as the True Lives documentary. Firstly, I think that this is a really interesting presentation about the Zodiac because it starts out with the canonical crimes, doing the basic walkthroughs that a lot of these television documentaries do. And if you're familiar with the case, a lot of that stuff might seem a little bit repetitive, but once it got to the 20-minute mark, it really began to heat up because when I read off the text of the 340 cipher, one of the lines in there is that wasn't me on the TV show, and this True Lives documentary actually featured an interview with the man who hosted the TV show, Jim Dunbar. Yes, somebody called into the Jim Dunbar show pretending to be the Zodiac Killer, and the show also provided a lot of explanations about how that was most likely a hoaxer. He was using the name Sam, but some people have referred to him as Eric Weil, and then there are other people who insist that that was not his real name. I'm not even too concerned about him because that wasn't the Zodiac on the TV show. Almost certainly not. And I think, though, that this documentary really got into the mindset of, well, what would people be experiencing when that happened? What was Jim Dunbar thinking when this person called in? And by his own admission, he participated in the TV show. He stated that he thought it was real. And he should think that it's real, because when somebody is calling in and pretending to be a serial killer, you don't know that they're pretending. You're not going to have that immediate instinct to just think that, oh, well, obviously this is a hoaxer. I think there should only be some extreme examples, like if the person is saying things that are contradictory to facts that the host might know about, and then they can catch him in a lie. Or if he's saying things that just seem a little bit too immature, like if it's a 10-year-old kid or something, someone with a very, very young voice, then you might doubt them. But another problem, though, with estimating the age of voices is something that I don't talk about nearly enough here on BBO War, and that is, when I listen to other call-in radio shows and call-in live streams, sometimes I can't gauge the voice at all. Like, the person will be like, "Yes, hello, a first-time caller here." And they're like, "Okay, well, how old are you?" "I'm 51 years old." And I'm like, what? I thought this person was like a 10-year-old girl or something, but it's a 51-year-old man. Stuff like that does happen, albeit rarely. But, I mean, multiple times, though, I've been completely off by like 20 or 30 years when I thought somebody was very young, and it turns out that they're very old. And the exact opposite can happen. Somebody can be extremely young, but they sound like they're old. They sound like, they're 20 years older than they actually are. So judging a voice is very difficult. But as I understand with the Jim Dunbar show, they were actually looking for different things because they wanted Brian Hartnell to listen to this, and Brian Hartnell was the surviving victim from Lake Berryessa. And he had the longest conversation with the Zodiac Killer, and he listened to the voice that was spoken on the Jim Dunbar show and was just like, absolutely not. He said that if he heard the Zodiac Killer's voice again, then he would have been able to recognize it. And the voice on the Jim Dunbar show simply was not the killer. And unfortunately, this could have been a very big breakthrough, but that was a hoaxer. And before we can completely condemn him, Eric Weil, or Sam, seems like someone who was dealing with some intense mental illnesses at the time. And another point, though, that was discussed in this documentary on the True Lives channel was actually raised by Michael Butterfield of ZodiacKillerFacts.com. And I would like to rephrase it into a challenge question, because you guys know that I can't resist challenge questions. So I'm going to throw this challenge question to you. How do you think the Zodiac Killer feels when the wrong person of interest is considered? And before you're going to be asking the question, well, is he watching YouTube videos about himself? The Zodiac Killer, if he lived into the 1980s, in the 1990s, was most likely aware that other POIs were considered. I mean, they even talk about how multiple suspects are discussed. Even though Arthur Lee Allen is the prime suspect and the only one who was named by law enforcement, the Zodiac could have easily been aware that there were other suspects who were being considered, especially in the 1990s with ZodiacKiller.com, and into the 2000s. If he lived that long, then he would easily be aware that people like Lawrence Kane were considered a Zodiac Killer suspect. Richard Gaikowski was considered as a Zodiac Killer suspect. And how would he feel in that situation? And the explanation that was provided by Michael Butterfield, I think, is actually a pretty good one. He would have just been sitting back and laughing, looking at how all of these people just have absolutely no clue that he got away with it. And I do think that that's how the Zodiac Killer would operate, because I've talked about this on some previous Zodiac Mondays where I stated that I didn't think that the Zodiac Killer was a pathological liar. No, I thought that the Zodiac Killer was a sociopathic liar. And he is somebody who would want to spin a web of lies purely for his own deceptive and malicious reasons, and all of that ties in together. But what do you think? How do you think the Zodiac Killer would feel if he knew that other people were suspects or persons of interest for his crimes, and knowing that he got away with it? Please give your responses to the challenge question down below, and in addition to blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com, you guys can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and then there is blackboxonlineradio88 on Instagram and TikTok. I mostly just use TikTok for uploading the shorts that come out Monday through Friday here on BBOR, mostly talking about serial killers, but any subject is fair game. And I will see you guys over there. Good.